Hello, in this module, I'll present an introduction to FDA's regulation of medical devices. You're working on developing a medical device and asking yourself, how can I get this to a patient in need? This module is a great place to start. It provides an intro to the regulations of medical devices. The goal of this module is to provide you with the basic foundation and a roadmap so that you know how to take the first step to get there. Let's review what we will cover. First, we'll explain FDA's role in regulating medical devices. Next, we'll review the actual definition and some basics about device classification. Then, we'll describe the steps to get a new product to market. And finally, we'll identify the different types of pre-market regulatory submissions that you may send. Let's start our discussions with the basics. FDA's role in regulating medical devices. The Food and Drug Administration is the oldest comprehensive consumer protection agency in the U.S. federal government. The U.S. FDA is considered the gold standard for regulating medical products in the world. FDA's mission is to promote and protect the public health. The scope is broad and covers foods, drugs, biologics, cosmetics, animal and veterinary medicines, tobacco, and of course, medical device and radiation-emitting products. Those products are regulated by the CDR-8, which stands for Center for Devices and Radiological Health. CDR-8 accomplishes this mission by evaluating the safety and effectiveness of medical devices before they get to market and ensuring that they stay safe once they reach the market. Pre-market refers to the medical device before it is sold and used in the US. Post-market refers to after the device has been commercialized. Its public health goal is for patients and providers to have timely and continued access to safe, effective, and high-quality medical devices. Note that drugs and biologics use similar meaning, but a different term. Safety and efficacy for drugs and biologics, and safety and effectiveness for medical devices. FDA's authority to regulate medical devices originates from the 1976 Medical Device Amendments to the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, or the FD&C Act. Prior to 1976, medical devices were not regulated in the U.S. The agency has continued to evolve its laws to ensure that it regulates these products in the most efficient ways as our scientific knowledge advances over time. Starting in 2002, CDR-8 began implementing a medical device user fee program. The regulated device industry provides these user fees to CDR-8 with the goal of advancing regulatory decision making. Essentially, the user fees are paid by the industry to pay for the salary of FDA staffers so that the medical product submission can be reviewed in a timely manner as agreed. For example, the timeline for 510K is no more than 90 days from submission to decision. For more information on the history of FDA's regulation of medical devices, please refer to the link shown. One of the most common questions asked to the CTR8s is my product a medical device? This is a great question, and we look to the law to help us determine the answer. The 1976 amendments provide us with the definition of a medical device. The full definition is found in Section 201H of the FD&C Act. In summary, a device is an instrument, apparatus, machine, implant, or in vitro reagent that diagnoses, cures, treats, or prevents a disease or condition. It does this by affecting the structure or function of the body, but doesn't achieve its purpose through chemical metabolism or as a drug. This definition excludes certain software functions, such as data storage and electronic patient records. Starting in 2013, the CTR8 defines a new type of device for standalone software. Software as medical device, or SAMD, has evolved rapidly, especially with the advance of artificial intelligence and machine learning for medical applications. Innovative products may feature aspects of devices as defined in the prior slide, as well as components such as drugs or biologics. We refer to these as combination products, which by definition involve at least two regulatory component types of drugs, devices, and biologics. An example of drug-device combination product is drug-eluting cardiovascular stent, whose two components work together to keep an artery open and prevent restenosis. Combination products involve the applicable regulatory responsibilities from all of the components involved. One FDA center will usually take the lead, and the agency's Office of Combination Products will help facilitate product jurisdiction. More information about combination products is available at the link below. This is a good place in the presentation for a brief note about quality systems. CTR8 is a big believer in the concept of total product life cycle, TPLC in short, meaning maintaining the highest standard of product quality from cradle to grave, or from end to end. It starts with ideation of the products, followed by the design verification and validation, then manufacturing and product releases, and continues through the product life cycle till obsolescence. The cycle restarts with release of a newer version. The concept of TPLC is encoded in the Management of Medical Device Quality System Regulation. The QSR is considered a general control and applies to all medical devices regardless of class. Our federal laws are intentionally written to be broad. The regulations that are specific to medical devices are found in 21 CFR Parts 800 to 1050. Parts 800 to 861 mostly address broad regulations that apply to most types of devices. Parts 862 to 1050 largely address device-specific requirements. For example, 21 CFR 812 addresses investigational device exemptions, a requirement that's applicable to all medical devices. 21 CFR 876 provides classification information and requirements specific to gastroenterology or urology. In addition, 21 CFR Parts 1 to 99 contains general regulations that apply to all medical products regulated by the FDA, including medical devices. As a result, depending on your specific device, you may have regulatory responsibilities outlined in all of these sections. Sometimes, the FDA laws and regulations are not sufficiently detailed to describe how FDA intends to regulate a device policy. In such cases, FDA will publish a guidance document that describes what FDA is thinking. A guidance document is not binding, but it does reflect FDA's current thinking, so it can often be an excellent resource of detailed information and clarifications on a particular policy. I would highly recommend to take the guidance document seriously, since it is used as a reference by the FDA reviewer staffs as well. FDA may initially issue a draft guidance document that describes the agency's proposed thinking on a topic. During this period, the public is invited to provide comments on the proposal. At the completion of the comment period, FDA will evaluate the public feedback and issue a final guidance document which reflects the agency's current thinking. The link at the bottom will take you to the FDA guidance database. FDA classifies devices, or more accurately, device types, in order to identify the degree of regulation for that product area. Classification is largely based on two factors: the device description, that is, its physical characteristics, and second, the intended use. As a result, in order to fully understand your device's classification, you need to identify both the device description and intended use. FDA classifies devices into Class 1, 2, or 3. The class of device generally increases with its degree of risk. In addition, each device type is assigned a product code, a PRO code in short, which refers to a three-letter coding. This allows FDA to group similar devices and intended uses. Note that the same device with a different intended use may have a different classification, product code, and class. This table describes the key characteristics of each class of medical devices. Moving from left to right, we describe each class according to the general list of devices, controls necessary, and submissions required. As the risk of the device increases, so does the regulatory control to ensure its safety and effectiveness. Controls may be general, special, and PMA. General control is what I like to refer as the hygienic factors. Common sense in designing and manufacturing medical products such as sterility, labeling, and others. Special controls are specific to the particular device, so it depends on the PRO code. Devices may be exempt from submission to the FDA or require a 510(k) or maybe a PMA with some alternatives. For example, Class 1 devices generally present the lowest level of risk. They are subject to general controls only, and most are exempt from pre-market submission. But some may require a 510(k). So, what are regulatory controls? These are requirements that apply to a product area or product code. They provide consistent requirements to predictably foster a safe and effective medical devices with the appropriate level of regulatory burden or oversight. Regulatory controls are usually broad, but some may be specific to a product area. General controls are the one type of regulatory controls that apply to all classes of medical devices, that is Class 1, 2, and 3. This table lists some examples of general controls along with where they appear in the regulation or law, and a brief description. For example, one fundamental general control is labeling. 21 CFR Part 801 provides details involving labeling, which broadly speaking requires providing information about the device to ensure that it's safe and effective use. Another example is establishment registration. This is described in 21 CFR 807. Businesses are required to register with the FDA on an annual basis. I'll note that the last two items listed in this table, adulteration and misbranding, are described in the FD&C Act, whereas the other controls are described directly in the regulation. Special controls are another type of regulatory control. These are specific to Class II devices only, so a Class II device will need to comply with both general and special controls. Note that Class III devices require extensive clinical data, making special controls alone insufficient. Special controls are not common. They are generally developed for well-established device types. All devices regulated under that Pro Code must comply with any identified special controls. Special controls can be identified in the CFR for that device type under the classification subsection. Special controls can be anything involved with the device type. Some common examples of special controls include device design, characteristics of or specifications, device testing, special labeling, or an applicable guidance document. Now that we have some background, let's see if we can put some of this together so we can figure out how to get your new medical device to market. Over the next few slides, I have outlined 5 steps that you can generally follow. The first step is for you to establish your product. This means to establish your product design as well as its purpose. The purpose can be described in terms of the intended use, which is usually broad, as well as the indication for use, which are usually more specific. You may also need to describe the duration of use for your product, as well as the target patient population, such as an age range or use of the disease condition. Once you have established these details, the next step is to confirm that the product is a medical device. This step may sometimes appear to be unnecessary if it's already obvious that the product is a medical device. However, this is not always the case. For example, if the device may be a combination product. For more detail, refer to the slides, Is my product a medical device? Once you have established that your product is, in fact, a medical device, step 3 is to identify its anticipated classification and regulatory pathway. The classification will identify the class of the device as 1, 2, or 3, and will generally tell you what regulatory submission will be needed in order for the device to get to market. After establishing the anticipated classification of your device, you are now prepared to generate the information needed to support its safety and effectiveness. We refer to this information as valid scientific evidence, which is required and defined in the regulation under 21 CFR 860.7. Evidence to support your device may include preclinical, animal, and clinical testing. And finally, once you have gathered all of your information and evidence, the last step is to prepare and send in the pre-market submission in order to get your product to market. Each submission type has its own set of processes, applicable requirements, review times, and evidence burden. So if you follow these 5 steps, you should have a clear path to get your product to market. Let's take a closer look at the different types of pre-market submissions that you may submit. 5 of the most common types of submissions are investigational device exemptions, IDE, pre-market notifications, commonly known as 510K, the pre-market approval application, PMA, de novo pathway, and humanitarian device exemptions, HDE. Let's start with the investigational device exemptions, or IDE. Of the 5 we will review, this is the one submission when you are not asking to get your product to market. Instead, this is the submission when you're asking for FDA approval to conduct clinical research on your investigational device. In an IDE, you are collecting clinical safety and effectiveness evidence as part of your overall valid scientific evidence that you plan to include in a future marketing application. Clinical studies will typically require FDA approval as well as approval by an institutional review board with the goal of protecting the safety of patients as much as possible during the research being proposed. Next, we'll highlight the pre-market notification, commonly known as 510K. 510K is the most prolific pre-market submission type, with several thousands of 510Ks submitted to FDA each year. This is a marketing application mostly for low and moderate risk devices. These are the ones that are class 1 or 2 typically. The 510K is a comparison type of submission in which FDA determines whether a new device is substantially equivalent to a predicate device, which is legally marketed as a class 1 or 2 devices. In this comparison, FDA examines 3 main aspects: the intended use, the device characteristics or features, and, as necessary, the results of the performance testing. Another type of submission is the pre-market approval application, or PMA. PMA is a marketing application for high-risk devices. These are the ones that are classified as class 3, as well as devices without an existing classification. In a PMA, a device must demonstrate a reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. In contrast to the 510K, PMA evidence must stand on its own. It is not an equivalence evaluation to another legally marketed devices. The next 2 submission types are alternatives to the 510K and PMA to get a new product to market. They have specific conditions where they apply. So let's review them. FDA is a conservative agency. Before the de novo pathway exists, the default for a new innovative device was class 3, the riskiest, and hence requires a PMA by default. But not all innovative devices are high risk. The de novo submission type is intended for devices for which there is no existing classification regulation, but the risk is low to medium. As a result, a de novo is usually for devices that the agency hasn't previously evaluated. These are usually new, novel device types. The de novo submission process will allow a new product to get to market by creating a new classification regulation for that device type, either in class 1 or 2 typically. A de novo may be considered an alternative to the PMA. The benefit of the de novo is to regulate the new device type with a reduced regulatory burden than that of a PMA. The last type of submission is the humanitarian device exemptions, HDE. This is the pre-market submission type for humanitarian use devices, which is defined as devices that are intended to treat or diagnose patients with a disease or condition that affects or is manifested in no more than 8,000 individuals per year in the United States. So there is a limitation of only 8,000 patients afflicted by this disease or conditions in the United States, and that's on an annual basis. If the device is of low to medium risk, then it will be more practical to file a 510(k). However, an HDE is useful if a device is high risk. For example, a Class 3 device. PMA requirements for a device that has limited patient population is not commercially attainable. Hence, the FDA pathway is more attractive. Unlike PMAs, HDE devices are exempt from demonstrating effectiveness. So it only needs to demonstrate safety. Instead, an HDE must show reasonable assurances of safety and probable benefit. This brings us to the summary. Let's recap what we covered in this module. First, we learned that FDA regulates medical devices by evaluating their safety and effectiveness. FDA classifies device types and assigns them to classes with regulatory controls and submission requirements. There is a general process of getting new products to the market, and we identified different types of regulatory submissions. Each of the pre-market submission types has specific requirements and characteristics. Understanding which submission type is most applicable to your new device will help guide you to develop the appropriate information and valid scientific evidence necessary to get your products to the market. This is the end of this module.